We are recording. We are here on the 7th of March with Russell Poulsen at his house in Reno. Okay, so I'm going to go back over some of the other stuff.
Okay.
Because what you said was really good and we had airplanes flying overhead.
Okay.
I apologize.
That's okay.
I want to go back again. Your dad talked about catching ski fever, making his first pair of skis as a Boy Scout project.
Right.
I'd like you to tell me about this Boy Scout project, about how important scouting was in his life, and also about the winter camp trip that they would do.
So scouting to my father was the most important thing in his life. It's what he applied himself to 100%. And it was a much more integrated program back then than it is now. You know, today I remember when I was a wee below, and they, you know, we carved soapbox derby cars and painted them and drove them down things, and you know, you do some camping things. But what they went into was much more in depth, and that really had a lot to do, I believe, with his scout leader, but also in the fact that he really wanted to be an Eagle Scout. He wanted to do absolutely everything in the scouting manual from A to Z and be the very best at it of anybody in the troop. And so I think that was a large driving force in his life, and the values that he learned as a Boy Scout never left him. And to the day he died, he always did the right thing. And there's one thing that I learned from my father is it's not hard always doing the right thing, because in your soul you always know what the right thing to do is. The hard part is just knowing and doing. And he always knew and did the right thing. So it was so, and I think that he really got that from the Boy Scouts.
Can you give me an example of something that sticks out in your memory where it might have been easier, I guess, by some standards, to not do the right thing?
Ooh, yeah. Actually, in any one given example, I can't pinpoint one, but I observed it on a regular basis.
What about the issue with the meadow when the USOC wanted to pave over the meadow? You showed me a picture of your mother with the buttercups.
Right.
And you told me that the buttercups never came back.
Yeah. You know, the USOC wanted to come in. Well, it was actually the state of California wanted to come in, and they wanted to pave Squaw Valley Meadow, and they wanted to turn the other end of the meadow into open sludge beds for sewage treatment for North Lake Tahoe. TTSA was supposed to be in Squaw Valley, according to the state of California. They wanted to condemn the entire valley, and that was their plan for it. My parents spent every dollar that they got from having their property basically stolen from them, everything that they were paid in legal fees, fighting the state of California to keep them from basically paving over Squaw Valley and just turning it into a sewage plant. That was their plan. The state of California, the way that they looked at it was, we're coming in, we're investing all this money for the Olympics, we've got to have a return on our investment. We happen to need a sewage treatment plant for North Lake Tahoe. You know, this all makes sense. We'll just come in to do that. That's the way that the bureaucrats thought. But yeah, that was the right thing, and he spent every penny he had protecting, you know, Squaw Valley Meadow to what it is today.
While this was going on, how much popular support did he have?
Zero. They were barbecued, actually, in the press. they were the bad guys. Especially the Sacramento Bee was vociferous in its attacks upon my parents, saying that they were trying to stop the Olympics and that they were standing in the way of progress, and it was pretty brutal, actually, to have that level of attack. But they pretty much stood alone in fighting the state of California.
And now your father's memorial plaque is on the rock down by the creek, overlooking the beautiful and pristine meadow.
Which he protected, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. What's interesting on top of that is he's also got awards from the state of California, ironically, for having fought them, and also from Placer County. And he was recognized by the Board of Supervisors for the fight to save Squaw Valley and save the meadow from certain destruction. So he did get recognized from, it's interesting the difference between the state of California then and the state of California now. I mean, today, none of that would have happened, but at the time, and it had a lot to do with the California Democratic Party. They came in and they wanted to turn Squaw Valley into a California state park, which they did to a certain extent, and it was a financial debacle with a lot of favors given out to Democratic donors, and ended up just costing the state millions of dollars that they never recovered.
So on the subject of the state park, there have been stories over the years, Ski Magazine notably, about this quote-unquote land for sale that the state of California couldn't give away, that it was a huge albatross.
Yeah, it was. It was a huge albatross, just because they never should have had it in the first place. And that was, part of the fight. My father saved everything of it that he could, but he owned all of that land. And it was just taken from him.
Yeah.
So
I want to go back to the Boy Scout project, and you are a cabinet maker by any standard, a skilled craftsman working with wood. Talk to me about this project, about what was involved, and we have him telling the story too.
Right. So whenever you're going to bend wood, wood becomes pliable when it's moist, when it's wet. If you look at a normal tree, a poplar or what have you, and you'll see it flowing in the wind and it'll sway back and forth. It has a given amount of flexibility in its natural state when it's wet. You can increase that flexibility even more by really soaking it in water. And then there are other ways of bending wood, which involve making sort of a plywood situation. But for them, they just took 2 planks of hickory down and took it into the hot springs and sat there and soaked the hickory in the hot springs until it got to where it was pliable, and then they'd take it out and clamp it in a form to create a ski. And creating the camber in the ski is probably the easiest, because the camber you're really only asking it to bend, maybe about 3/4 of an inch out of its normal flat plane. But the tip is a different story, because the tip has got to come up, especially the skis they were making back then. You have to remember that there wasn't any groomed slopes. They were going through fresh snow. So the tip had to come up fairly steep, and it had to come up in a perfect round, so that when you went through the snow, you wouldn't dive under it. You'd ride up on top of it. So getting the tip to bend would have been probably the most difficult without it breaking, because what happens is when you're dealing with especially something like hickory, as you bend it, it has a tendency of wanting to just fracture down the center, down the middle of the plank. So I'm sure that they probably had quite a few broken tips, and that used to be the big deal with skiing. You know, you'd ruin your skis by breaking a tip, just because the tip was always under the most strain.
So, and they did all of this by hand. They planed and sanded. There were no fancy, marvelous tools that you could pick up for the right price at home.
No, this was all done in the garage, you know, and just with tools, hand tools they had at their disposal. Hand planes and chisels and hand saws, coping saws, things of that nature.
How long do you think a project of this magnitude would have probably taken?
I think they probably spent about a week at it, because you got to remember these skis are pretty basic. It's one piece of wood, and it's just bent to shape, and then you have to shape the skis themselves. You know, you have to bring them to a tip. You know, you want to put a groove down the middle. You know, so that it's going to track straight, and you know, then you've got to get your bindings on there. So probably, you know, 2 or 3 hours a day for about a week, I'd say.
And then once these skis are made and they strap them on with leather straps, fancy release bindings,
right?
Kind of explain for the non-skier.
Mm-hmm.
Contrast skiing those skis with the technology that's available today, where you just sort of look at the
or you snap in. Yeah. Well, what they used were what we call today bear trap bindings, and bear trap just meant that you clamped the front toe down, and then your heel had a wire that was on some springs that went around the heel of your boot, and that would flex up and down so that you could climb. And then when you got to the top of the mountain, there were a couple of hooks on the back that you'd hook those wires under, and that would hold down your heel. And then you would ski, and the skiing technique really utilized the entire body to make the ski turn. Today, you can, especially with shaped skis, you can just simply, you know, slide from side to side and get your feet angled correctly, and your ski's going to turn on its own. Those skis didn't turn on their own. They had to be forced into a you know, a sweeping turn. So it was definitely different, and you know, if you look back at the old cartoons of the day, there was always the guy with his broken leg, you know, in the ski lodge. There was always, you know, 2 or 3 people with broken legs in the ski lodge, which you never see today. But back then, it really was the situation. People were constantly breaking their legs because they had these ski boots that only came up above the ankle. And you had these monster skis that were much larger than what we're skiing today. So you had all of this torque working against you. And if you went ass over tea kettle, well, there was no, you know, fancy release bindings to save you. You had a good chance of breaking a limb, and which they often did.
The winter camp trips with the Boy Scouts.
So once they'd created their skis and become proficient at skiing, what they did was they went over via Galena, went up and over Mount Rose
on skis,
and skied down into Incline Village, and that's where they had their winter ski camp. And they would go down there and they'd spend 2 or 3 days camping out, so they'd have to go back with their packs and tents and food and everything that they needed. And he was 15, 16 years old, skiing up and over the top and doing ski camp in Incline Village.
One of the pictures that you've given me shows your dad and Marty Arroget and Ed. And
That's in 1932,
and
yeah.
the caption says, Ed, Sven, and me.
Yeah.
Tell me about these Norwegian nicknames.
Well, at the time, if you were a ski jumper or a skier of any notoriety, originally you were Norwegian or you're a Scandi of some sort. It goes back to Snowshoe Thompson and at the time you had Sigmund Ruud and all the best skiers in the world were Norwegians. Now, not much has changed really, because if you look at the medal count, the Norwegians have taken more gold medals in the Winter Olympics than any other country, including the United States, over the years. And so they gave themselves Norwegian nicknames. Now my father was Danish, so he was already, a Scandi of sorts, but they called each other, Sven and Ed, and just really wanted to live that lifestyle. And actually, what was interesting was right around the time when my father started his first ski resort, the first ski resort or first ski area in the state of Nevada. He was inching a little bit more towards Austrian and Swiss influence.
And that was Ski Tyrol.
Ski Tyrol, exactly.
So tell me a little bit about that. It got interrupted by the war.
Yeah, he went up with Ed Healy, and they decided to start this, and they set up a rope tow with an old an engine out of an old Ford, and they built a pretty elaborate little lodge up there. It had a little bar, and it was really beautifully built. It was the photos of it are exceptional. Regretfully, there's nothing left of it, but at the time they called that Grass Lake, and that's really where the small ski area is there. That was Sky Tavern for a while, but he started that and had his own ski school there, and he would take people from the Mapes Hotel and from the different hotels there in downtown Reno, take them up and teach them to ski, and of course it only lasted for 2 years before the war came out, and by the time the war was over, the gentleman who owned that he was leasing the land from told him, what, I think we're going to do our own thing.
And of course, by then, your dad had shifted his focus to
Squaw Valley, exactly.
And so the war was over.
The war was over, and it didn't take them long to get right back into Squaw Valley and build the first house there. They built the first home out of old Army barracks, because at the time you couldn't buy any. There were no lumber companies. Nothing had started up yet. Everything had been taken over by the U.S. government and had all been put to the war effort. So you couldn't buy a nail or a plank of wood anywhere. So what they did was they went to Stead Air Force Base, who was dismantling. They were dismantling a bunch of barracks, and they bought quite a few old Army barracks. And actually the old, if you remember the Squaw Valley Lodge, and there were these buildings along the right-hand side of the lodge, those were Army barracks that were transported to Squaw Valley wholesale. They weren't dismantled, they were just brought in, and that was the original lodging in Squaw Valley, were the old Army barracks. And but what he did was he took the buildings and dismantled them and built the house, which is today Graham's restaurant there.
So we've talked about this a little bit before. We're here in Reno, and Mount Rose is sitting in the background. Mm-hmm. Every day you walk out in the backyard and you see Mount Rose.
Yeah.
And I know that you go skiing up there, and you hike into the backcountry. And tell me again, what you think about your father's boyhood adventures, and what's it like for you today to be skiing in that place that he explored?
Yeah, actually climbing Mount Rose itself, the real Mount Rose, because where Mount Rose is actually Slide Mountain. There's a real connection when I do that to knowing that I'm doing what my father was doing when he was young. It's nice. It's a good feeling when you get up there, because you can just get to the top. And I've got some old photos of him up at the summit of Mount Rose, and he actually built quite a few of the trails that go up to the top of Mount Rose in the summertime. He and his troop did that, and they did the signs themselves, and went up and put the signs up, and they actually a good friend of Glenn's actually found one of the original ones that he had made, and I think Glenn has it today, from back in the backcountry, that had just been back there and weathered and everything. But it was one of the ones that he had made with the Boy Scout troop.
So that leads me to my next question about the work that your dad did with Dr. Church.
Right. So when he went to UNR, he was a passionate skier, and Dr. Church was working on snow surveys. And so my father was always one. He worked his way through college, either delivering milk, or he delivered milk for Model Dairy. He delivered newspapers as a kid, and in the wintertime he worked for Dr. Church. And so Dr. Church would send them out with these huge panoramic cameras, and what they needed to get an accurate estimate of how much water was going to come from a snowpack was to have snow samples and data taken from exact data points. So he learned surveying because they always had to go back to the exact same place to take their snow samples, because you can have snow that's going to be deeper in one place or deeper in another. So if you're setting up a mathematical equation, you want to have some constants, and so your constants are the points where the data is taken from. And so he had to do surveying, he had to do photography, they had to haul these huge coring rods, which they'd put together and core the snow down to the bottom, and then they'd bring that snow up and weigh it and determine the amount, the water content in it, and then also had to be a skier. So skier, surveyor, photographer, and mountain man. They had a cabin up on Rifle Peak, and they spent an entire winter in that cabin on Rifle Peak, never left. And what they had to eat was what they called winter stew. And winter stew meant that there was one big pot of stew, and as it got down, they'd just add more cans of beans and more dried meat to it, and fill it back up, but it never emptied. Well, winter stew was started in November and finished in April. And so it was just one big pot, and as people came in, they'd come and they'd dish it out, and like I said, as it got down, they'd pour in more cans of beans and more ham and some more potatoes and carrots, and that was dinner, winter stew.
That's amazing. Not too long ago, I had a conversation with your brother Wayne, and he was sharing with me about how very different Reno was, Squaw Valley was, that it was just this whole other world.
Yeah.
That if you're new to the area, it's pretty hard to imagine.
Yeah, I think it's very hard to imagine. You know, Reno, It's sad. I mean, the casinos brought a lot of money to Reno, but they ruined one of the most beautiful small cities in the western United States. Downtown Reno was a beautiful place to live, and you know, you had the Truckee River flowing through, and you had the train coming through, and you know, people lived there, and really, you know, there was a thriving community that really kind of got, I think they kind of lost their way with the casinos, and now they're paying the price because it's really such a mess down there, and which is sad.
Tell me about the big adventure when you get to come, you and your brothers and your sister, and you get to come to Reno, because that was like...
So I'll tell you two things. One of them was every spring, for me, being the youngest of 8, when I needed clothes, my mother would just tell me to go into the attic, and whenever anybody was done with their clothes, they'd box them up and put them in the attic. So when I went shopping, it was basically usually crawling over, you know, through the insulation and over, you know, cross beams, and trying to find something that was going to fit me. But once a year, in the springtime, was always my big deal. I got to come down to Sears and Roebuck, and I got a new pair of cowboy boots in the springtime, and I got a new pair of jeans, and I got one good cowboy shirt, and I usually got a new cowboy hat as well because my head was growing. So I got a full outfit every spring, and I was the happiest kid in the world. And so the other story that I have that ties in with that is there used to be a Western store in downtown Reno, which is one of the few remnants of the real old town Reno. It was called Parker's Western Wear. And my father, when I was growing up, had a name that we could walk into Parker's, we could walk into any establishment in either Truckee or Taos City, including in Squaw Valley, and get what we wanted and sign our name, and then just leave. And that's the way that things were done back then. It was, and that was true at Commercial Hardware in Reno. Commercial Hardware used to be, you know, before the Home Depots and all the rest. We had Commercial Hardware in Reno. It was the same thing, and it was just very simply, they knew who my father was. We'd just sign our name, and the bills would come to him, and then he raised holy hell with us if we'd been over exuberant. But it was a different world. It was a world where a handshake meant everything, where a man's word was much better than a credit card, and it was just a more gentle world, and something that I really believe my father to have been fairly naive when he was dealing with Alex Cushing. But when you look at the environment in which he grew up, he couldn't have ever even comprehended that people like Alex Cushing existed. When it came to doing dirty business deals or things of that nature.
So your father has some letters from Alex that you found in your parents' possessions.
Yeah.
Handwritten letters where Alex makes some assurances.
Yeah.
And that was...
Yeah, it was pure lies, but you know, it was, you know, he was a New York attorney, and he was dealing with a Reno, Nevada Boy Scout. It's basically what you've got on either side of the picture, and you know, Alex didn't do anything that a good businessman wouldn't have done.
Fair enough.
You know, it just had to. He was just dealing with a naive young man who was trying to build his ideal, and really believed that everybody was with him.
So to back up a little bit, your father and Marty Araget founded the UNR ski team.
Right.
Do you know much about what was involved in getting the university to agree to such a venture?
I think that at the time, he also started the first winter carnival for the university. And I think that at the time, the university was, for things that were outside the university, in other words, ski teams and things of that nature, they were all, gung ho, go for it, do what you want to do. There were, I think, a lot fewer constraints at the university level as well at that time. And I think that if you had, the other thing that you have to remember is this is at a time where things are changing so quickly. You remember when my father was young, they were driving Model Ts, and that was new. And now we've got telephones, and now we've got, there's something new and huge happening literally every year. Airplanes are becoming more available, and you can, there's all these things that are happening all at the same time. So I think that there was a real openness to trying new things and to starting new clubs. Starting new clubs was an easy thing to do. So
tell me the where in the hell is Reno story after your dad coached the team to.
Yeah, so their first ski team when they went to they call it the championships. It was the first time that a West Coast team had even ski raced against an East Coast team. You got to remember that back then, to get from the East to the West Coast was still a big ordeal. You had to get on a train, or there were very few people that could afford to fly anywhere. So it was a big deal for them to come together in an intercollegiate competition to begin with. And at the time, Dartmouth was considered, they were the stuff. They were the ones that dominated the ski teams. And they came in, and this group from UNR came in and cleaned their clocks. And the quote from the coach from Dartmouth was, "I got to go home and see where in the hell Reno, Nevada is," because he had no clue who he was dealing with.
How did they come up with the money to do this? That must have been quite the effort.
Yeah, what was interesting to me was when I see photos of their team and how they traveled. They were very elegant travelers. They were very elegant people. They dressed absolutely to the nines with nice ties and nice overcoats, and they really paid attention to their dress, and they were absolute gentlemen when they traveled, which is a huge difference from what I experienced as a young man, which was we were just a bunch of hellions running around and in t-shirts, tennis shoes, and blue jeans. So that always struck me in looking back at the old photos, just how beautifully dressed they always were.
Yeah. So I'd like to switch a little bit and talk about your mom and dad, and of course they met in Sun Valley, and you've talked about pretty much the minute your dad laid eyes on your mom. He was.
So the way that they met was interesting. I'm trying to remember the gentleman's name, but at this point in time, World War II is beginning, and they had these big pushes to save the starving Greeks. Well, one of the Greek politicians had fled the country and was in Sun Valley. And my father was his ski instructor, but he would stay out gambling all night. So his valet would come down in the morning and say, well, Mr. Galanicus, or whatever his name was, won't be skiing today. And so Otto Lang said to my father, he says, well, we've got little Sandy Kunau here who needs an instructor. Why don't you go ahead and teach her? So it was thanks to the starving Greeks, or to the partying Greeks, I should say, that they got to meet. And in that day and age, the ski instructors were encouraged to mingle with the clients, especially the female clients, after skiing, to come and dance and dine with them and entertain them, basically 24/7. And so, but obviously in a gentlemanly way. Although my father recounts on many occasions getting locked into these wealthy women's bedrooms, they'd lock him in, have to go out through the window. But that's where they met, and they danced in the Duchen room. And before she left, he had told her that she was going to live in Squaw Valley. And nobody had ever even heard of Squaw Valley, but he told her, he said, you're going to be living in Squaw Valley. And she went home, and they wrote each other, and she finally came out and never went back to New York.
So they're engaged, and your father brings your mother to Squaw Valley and
brings her to Reno, Nevada. Reno, Nevada, brings her to Squaw Valley. And actually, this is the KT-22 story is after they were married. They were married. They already had Chris, I think, and a couple kids when they were getting going there. I think that Chris is probably 1940, maybe 45. Right in the war there somewhere. So she's already got kids. They put up a tent in Squaw Valley.
From the penthouse to the outhouse.
To the tent house. That's right. My mother always said she went from the penthouse to the tent house. Okay. Because she was a New York socialite, and her father owned the penthouse at the Sherry Netherlands hotel overlooking Central Park in New York. So she'd had a very high-end upbringing.
So they hiked to the top of this really fierce mountain, a mountain that has a reputation today of being one of the most demanding runs accessible by a chairlift, and there's no chairlift, no nothing. So
they climbed to the top of KT-22, and my mother's looking around going, I can't ski down this. And my father's assuring her, oh, Sandy, you're a fine skier, you can ski down this. And he would always get very upset with her when she did kick turns, because, doing a kick turn was sort of a cop-out, because if you knew how to ski, you didn't want to do a kick turn. But she would go into so she's trying to figure out, how am I going to get down this alive? And so she traverses across the hill into the trees on the one side, and then traverses across the hill into the trees on the other side, and pretends that she's not doing a kick turn, hiding in the trees while she's doing so, and goes back and hides in the trees on the other side and does a kick turn, and she does this all the way to the bottom, and my father's down at the bottom going, oh, yeah, right, Sandy, I can't tell you're doing a kick turn in there. And so she gets to the bottom, and he announces to her, he said, well, that's 22 kick turns it took you to get down that mountain. So we're going to name this mountain KT-22 after your 22 kick turns.
That's probably one of the best stories, one of the best love stories for anybody who's been around Squaw Valley for any length of time.
Yeah. Especially if you knew my mother, because she was so small and so petite and so just full of character.
So, what are some of your favorite memories? You know, things had to be very rustic in those early days, and the stories that you remember about being the only family there. Your brother talks about...
Well, what was interesting was we always had stores that would keep us going through the winter. In the fall, my father would go duck hunting, and he also, during the summer, would do a lot of salmon fishing. And he used to bring back the ducks and drop them on the front porch, and we'd have to go pluck them. And so when we were done plucking the ducks, what we would do is he would take an old milk carton, and he'd open up the milk carton, and he'd put the duck in it, and then you'd fill the milk carton up the rest of the way with water, and then you'd close it up, and you'd put that in the freezer. And what that did was it made a freezer full of bricks, big square, perfectly stacked bricks, each one with either salmon or duck in it, and of course we always had venison as well. So we had one of those big lift-up freezers that was full of game and fish and then we had a monstrous pantry that had a big 5-gallon thing of honey in it, and it had we had everything in enormous quantities, big things of Tang, in case we couldn't get orange juice and things of that nature. So if we got snowed in, which happened probably every other winter, where you'd be snowed in for a week or 10 days, there was always food just in the pantry to get us through, because you gotta remember, we had 12 people living in the house. It wasn't a family of 3, and everybody was pretty hearty eaters. So it was that was always I always went to other people's homes, and I was always amazed at how small the refrigerators were and their pantries were, because we had this monstrous thing. But we also had some very special things, like our honey came from Squaw Valley, because the beekeepers used to love Squaw Valley because of all the buttercups and all the wildflowers. So we had beekeepers keeping huge quantities of bees in the summertime, and their payment for using the land was always a big 5-gallon thing of honey. Then we also had the sheepherders that would come in, and they used to live at the sheepherders camp, which is where the resort at Squaw Creek is now. And whenever they came into the valley, they would bake bread for us. And they had this thing called squaw bread, and also sheepherders bread. And sheepherders bread and squaw bread both are breads that are meant to keep for a long time, so that the shepherd can come and bake once a week or once every 10 days, and then just carry big blocks of loaves into the backcountry with them while they're traipsing around, so that they've always got some fresh bread. So they also used to bring us fresh sheepherders bread and fresh squaw bread all the time. And then we had, of course, a couple cows down on our own livestock area. We had 40 head of horses as well, where we ran the stables. And so I can remember going down and getting fresh milk in the morning, bringing that back up and skimming the cream off the top, and that was a cool way to grow up. When I was a kid, today, the kids will all be watching Van Damme, or even that's even passé now, or Fast and Furious or something else. But when I was a kid, it was cool to be a cowboy. And so I was the coolest of all, because I was a cowboy in the summertime and a ski racer in the winter, and I was cool as shit.
So I'm curious, your mom, growing up in the penthouse of the Sherry Netherlands,
yeah,
how did she learn to cook? Because she had a reputation for being a wonderful cook.
Well, I'm not so sure about that. My grandmother was a wonderful cook. My mother was much more nuts and bolts, you know, getting the family fed. My grandmother really spent a lot of time in the kitchen. And my mother worked every day. She worked absolutely every day running the real estate office and development company, and she was the postmaster for Squaw Valley. She was a school bus driver for Squaw Valley. In the beginning, she did everything. So she was, in a lot of cases, you know, she really depended on my grandmother to do a lot of the cooking along with a nanny. We always had a live-in nanny / cook / everything, which she really needed. And you know, she was a tough business lady, very, very tough. I can remember somebody coming in and saying he wanted to schedule a meeting with my father, and she said, "Well, he's off flying, but I'm happy to meet with you. What time would you like to come?" And the guy looked at her and he says, "If it's all the same to you, Sandy, I think I'll wait till Wayne gets back," because she was a lot tougher than he was at business. But a very, very bright lady. Very intelligent. She was Mensa. I don't remember what her IQ was, but it was off the charts. And very tough lady. Tough and delicate at the same time.
At her memorial service, I believe it was Mark McLaughlin, read a letter that you had found. She kept carbon copies of the letters that she wrote, and this particular letter had been dispatched, written on a manual typewriter when she and your father were still camping in the meadow, and there was the house hadn't been built yet.
Right.
Camping in the meadow, pictures of the daily shower.
She had a traveling typewriter. And she used to write actually for Ski Magazine and skiing, and when she traveled around Europe for the World Cup, she was part of the press. So she did that as well.
And she wrote about this grand adventure that she was on.
Yeah.
This was really something.
Yeah, there was some sort of show at the time about how, about very special places and very special families and things that were just sort of out of the ordinary. And she wrote this absolutely beautiful story about Squaw Valley and her life there. And I don't think she ever actually submitted it. I don't think it ever got sent in, which is sort of sad. But what she wrote about it was exceptional.
So the campsite where they would pitch that tent, the campsite's still there just below. Right.
That's where they decided to build their home. Yeah.
And the trees, there are still stakes that now.
There's still actually bolts in those trees from when they would set up the tents. They would bolt the tents to the trees. And camping was a little bit different back then. You actually built a floor for the tent, and it was a big heavy canvas tent that a lot more what you'd see in the movies from out of Africa or something. It wasn't crawling out of a pup tent that's all done in nylon. So when they were camping there, it was they really came in and set up for the summer, or even for the year sometimes, in really nice tents. Big heavy canvas.
That's just amazing. I think two last things. You told me a story once about when you get off the bus and the house being buried in snow
Mm-hmm.
and your mom waiting for you?
Yeah, I was the last child, and this has always sort of struck me because in a lot of ways my mother was sort of over the whole idea of raising children by the time that she'd had me. She was, you know, she'd been through every horrific experience you could possibly go through, especially after Sandra. And yet, when I got off the bus every day, even though she worked as much as she did, there was a path leading from the bus stop over to our house. It was a very short walk. And she waited for me on that path every day. And with arms open and down on a knee and waiting for me. And it always just sort of astounded me how unbelievably loving she was. That side of her, because she was a tough businesswoman. She was a, you know, she was somebody that was, and she was tough with the family too. This was, you know, nuts and bolts, and you never disagreed with what she had to say. That's just the way it was. But she also had this unbelievably loving side that was remarkable. You never, ever doubted ever that you were loved as a child in that house, of any of us. And that was a beautiful thing.
My last question, just take me through a little bit, your father teaching you how to ski, because when we watch you now, you possess an elegance when you ski that is just, you never see that.
You know, when I was learning to ski from my father, I was a disaster. And he would show me how to ski, and I'd say, oh no, you're wrong. This is how you have to do it. Because I knew everything, and I was such a little shit. But he would be so patient, and he would just laugh at me and say, okay, but over the years, all of his lessons, you know, it's true that when you teach children, when you tell children something, they may scoff at you or turn a shoulder or what have you, but in reality, they're listening a lot more than you think that they are. And slowly over the years, I've come to ski like my father did. And it's just been sort of, I don't know if it's osmosis or anything, but I certainly didn't learn it from him at the time.
But you were watching and
Yeah.
stuck.
Yeah. Yeah.
What do you think he'd say if you were still here?
He'd laugh. He'd laugh. My father had all of these little sayings. He'd look at you, you know, because we're always getting into mischief. And he'd look at you and he'd say, you're breeding a scab right on the end of your nose. Or he'd say, or he'd look at, you know, because when I finally got into high school, I started to let my hair grow long because that's what everybody did. And my father, when people come into the house, you know, and with long hair, with guys with long hair, he'd say, oh, aren't you going to introduce me to your girlfriend? And then he'd sit there and look at us and he'd go like this. He'd go, Dad, knock it off. But he had the most wonderful belly laugh. I never knew a man who enjoyed his family so much, and just really got a good chuckle out of so many things. And a lot of, you know, very serious, I mean, our family had a lot of serious problems. I mean, we had broken backs, we had broken bones on a regular basis. We were getting thrown in jail. We were getting in fights. We were, running away from, from school in Switzerland and stealing buses and there was always some sort of Travis.
Who stole the bus?
Well, there's actually 3 of us could claim.
Wait a minute,
Claim
I don't
that
know
one.
this story.
Eric stole a bus one time. Sandra stole a bus, and I stole a bus in Argentina and got thrown in the Huscow in Argentina for stealing a bus. So yeah, I mean, just all sorts of there was never a moment where there wasn't something that had to be dealt with. But he just lived through it all and just would chuckle and just deal with it.
Actually, I lied. There is one more thing. Speaking of broken bones and whatnot, the one time we had speed skiing trials in Squaw Valley. You know where I'm going with this. Dick Dorworth said, when you landed and crumpled, his first thought was, "Oh my God, I've killed Wayne and Sandy's youngest son."
It was a pretty hard impact.
So
I knew it was going to hurt.
Take me back up on the hill where the event was supposed to be out on Cornice 2. It got moved.
It got moved because Alex, being Alex, said, well, if we hold it off the ski jump, that's the state of California property. They can't sue us. So they went down, and their big thought was, well, we'll cover over the section where, from the lip of the jump, over the other section with the hay bales and fill it all in with snow. Well, that's not going to change a goddamn thing. You're still going off the jump, and you're still going to fly. And then, if you look at a normal ski jump, you have the starting blocks, and there were these concrete starting blocks that were built into the mountain, and generally a ski jumper will start from a lower starting block in an 80 or 90 meter jump. Well, we decided we needed more speed than that, so we went, and the ski jumper is usually wearing clothing that's not aerodynamic. They want the clothing to catch the air so that they float and fly a little bit farther. We were wearing speed suits, which meant that we were going, even if we had left from where they were leaving, we'd have been going 15, 20 miles an hour faster than they were when they went off the jump. But we started a good 40, 50 feet above where they were, so that when we hit their starting blocks, we were already doing 40, 50 miles an hour. So, hitting that jump at that speed, there's just no way you can suck it up. And I went off of there and immediately I can remember going off, and I was looking out at the Blythe Arena and the parking lot, and I couldn't even see the landing area. I was just looking out at the parking lot and going, well, I might actually make the parking lot. And then, of course, I started to sink, and what was happening is those skis are so big. They're 240 centimeters. The wind started catching the skis and pushing me over backwards. So when I landed, my skis were actually straight up and down, and I landed straight on my back. Skis shattered into toothpicks. Tyrolia bindings shattered into a pile of rubble. Tore out all the rivets in my Salomon boots. But interestingly, the impact was not what hurt me. The impact, I knew I was going down hard, so I relaxed, because I learned a long time ago that if you know you're going to go down, you're going to hit hard, you're better to relax. Actually, they say that usually the one in a drunk driving accident that survives is the drunk, because they're relaxed. So I just sort of let go, and what happened was I bounced forward and went through the speed trap on my face, with my face grinding into the snow. Went through the speed trap at 82 miles an hour on my face. And then what happened was the helmet caught the snow, and the helmet had this big scoop on the back, which was there for aerodynamic reasons, but it was solid fiberglass. It was solid. And that scoop caught the snow and flipped my entire body weight using my head over the front. And that's where I broke my neck. And it was a compression fracture that broke there's some little bones that come off of the inside of the neck, especially C5 and C6, and one of those bones compressed to the point where it broke off and went through my esophagus, and so it was kind of stuck in my esophagus, and I was bleeding a little bit in my throat. So anyway, I ended up on my back again out in the landing zone, and my father walked out and he looked down at me and he said, "Well, are you going to get up?" And so I said, all right, I better get up. So I got up and I managed to walk over to the side, and somebody handed me a beer and got my picture taken, and then I started to cough up blood. And so they decided they better go have a look at me, and took me in and found out I had a broken neck. But it was an interesting. We had quite a few injuries, though. I wasn't the only one.
Well, your dad was pretty matter-of-fact about it.
Oh, he was very matter-of-fact about it. Matter of fact, when they found out I had a broken neck, they called the ambulance. And he looked at him and said, "Ambulance costs too much money." He said, "Put them on a backboard and we'll throw them in the back of the Suburban." And so they put me on the backboard that they use for bringing people off of the mountain, strapped me to that, and they shoved me into the back of the Suburban. And I can remember the Suburban that we had then had a fixed seat. They didn't have these flop-down seats that we've got now. So they had to get me in and prop the board up and open the window so that the board could stick out the window. So I was lying like this, driving to Truckee with no seatbelt, no nothing, just drop off to the hospital, strapped to this backboard in the back of the Suburban.
And here you are, not too much worse for the wear.
Not too much worse for the wear. Yeah, we were pretty sturdy. We got a lot of broken backs, actually, a lot of broken bones. Sandra was the worst. She broke her legs 7 times. I only broke mine 4. And she broke her back, and Lance broke her nose for her. And
how did that happen?
Oh, he got mad at her, punched her in the face, and broke her nose. Yeah, tough.
So not exactly the Brady Bunch, huh?
No. Yeah, not the Brady Bunch. Yeah, I used to watch that show and just laugh.
Yeah, it kind of always amazed me that Marcia didn't get punched by one of those boys, because she certainly had it coming. Anyway, I think we're good here.
Okay,
So,
good.
Thank you.
You're welcome.